Some people tell me that CSS is not a programming language and that I am not a real programmer. When I ask these people why do you believe that CSS is not a programming language, I get a variety of answers. All through the years, I heard things like, in order for CSS to be a programming language, well, at least it should be able to round things. It should be able to round some units. In order for CSS to be a programming language, well, it at least should have booleans, right? Cannot have a programming language without a booleans. That's nonsense. CSS needs booleans. In order for CSS to be a programming language, well, at least it should be able to handle some very difficult maths. And when I show people that all of these things are possible in CSS nowadays, I usually get the same answer. The answer being, yes, but it's still not a programming language. Because you cannot even type CSS. And even if you could do that, it is still the worst language ever because it doesn't even have the ability to scope. Now, I don't know if we should call it a layout language. Maybe we should call it a layout engineering language. All I can tell you is that CSS has evolved in the last couple of years and will continue to do so. This is just an intro. This is not a presentation about all the latest and fancy CSS features, which I usually do, but this is more technical. We are going to get into that engineering mindset. This is engineering CSS, from type to function. Hi, everyone. Sorry for the little dramatic intro. I hope you're all right. Kind of wanted to try something out there. My name is Brecht. Hi, very happy to be here. And I am a front-end developer, also doing a bit of developer relations work, and I go by the handle utilityband.com. Not so much on the X thing anymore, more on Blue Sky. That's where you find me nowadays. Yeah. You know why, I guess. I work for a company called I.O., which is a full-service digital agency located in Belgium, the Netherlands, and Scandinavia. Happy to work there. Also happy they allow me to come to events to speak about my passion. Besides my work at I.O., I'm also a Google developer expert on web UI and CSS. It's been a lot of fun being part of that community, getting inspired by so many people out there. It's really interesting how much the web community lives. It's so nice to see so many different things going on. But I didn't become a Google developer expert because I'm a natural speaker. I actually used to have a big stage fright. I was more of a writer, and I wrote on my own little blog, utilityband.com, where I still write about a lot of things. A bit about UX, a bit about accessibility, but most and foremost, about CSS, because CSS is the most beautiful language on the web, right? No? I'm not sure if I would agree with me on that, probably not, but still, I love writing about it so much that I do a bunch of guest writing as well on Smashing Magazine CSS Tricks, and the I.O. Tech Hub, which is our company tech blog, really some upcoming talented writers out there. I do suggest you check it out, not just because it's for a company, but it's for the people. And last but not least, I'm also a bit involved with web standards, but you've already heard pretty much enough about me. I'm also into golf lately. I started to golf. If anyone has tips on my golf swing, I'll be here all day. So, let's get started, right? Let's get started and talk about custom properties. Wait, modern CSS, and you're going to talk about custom properties? Some of you are probably thinking that. Yeah. And you know what? I understand it. Because already in 2023, which is the CSS survey of 2 years ago, we already saw some good numbers. We saw that 93% of the people have used custom properties, and only 1.3% has never heard of it. So what's this guy in front talking about, right? We all know this stuff. This is basic material. Well, there's a little caveat here. We're still using those CSS variables more like a constant, kind of as a replacement of our SAS variables. And we are missing out on so much. We're only using a depth of 0 or 1, while these custom properties, they are the fundamentals of engineering in CSS. Because there's so much more than constants. They can have a fallback. They can be overwritten. They can contain anything you want. They can be typed since recently. And also, they can be controlled by JavaScript. And to illustrate a little bit about this fallbacking, let's kick it off with a little intro into these techniques, with a little case that I create, something I'd like to call the button case. This is about the fallbacking. So what are we going to make? We're going to make 4 buttons. You've probably seen buttons that kind of look like this before, right? There are many design systems that have buttons that look like this. We have a primary button, we have a secondary button, and we have outline variants for both of those. Pretty basic button stuff. They have a bit of HTML. Once again, I'm keeping this demo pretty simple. Just a button, a class name secondary, a class name outline, and a class name outline secondary. The button without a class will be my primary. They have some default styles, which I'm not going to repeat the whole time, but all of them have a bit of padding, they have a bit of border radius, they have a font size, a cursor pointer, and a very, very lazy transition, all on my behalf. It's a demo, I can do it, right? That's okay, that's okay. So let's start engineering. What do these buttons actually have in common? If you were paying close attention, you'd notice that they change color. When I hover over them, when I focus on them, they change color. Now, I don't care whether that's a background color, whether that's a border color, whether that's a text color. All I know is that they change color equally. And this is how I would set up my fill buttons. Inside of my button element, I would scope a variable called color, which I would set to white, which is my primary background color. That custom property will be read inside of my background and inside of my border color. Now, when a button is hovered or focused, I would change that custom property to aquamarine instead of redefining these properties, meaning that on hover, that color would change. I will do the same thing for my secondary button, where the color would be light green, and the last one is my secondary hover and focus state, where the color is set to lawn green. Those are actual CSS colors, by the way. Gotta be creative with those. This already recreates your fill buttons, just by overruling these custom properties. That's all you have to do these days. That's all you have to do. Let's kick it up a notch. And let's start working with something I like to call a private variable. Now, don't worry, you haven't missed anything in CSS. There's no such thing as a private variable. It's kind of a convention. Maybe there are some other dinosaurs like myself who used the underscore in JavaScript before const and let were a thing. Not sure if there's any here, but it's sort of a convention for me to show that this is a private variable, adding an underscore to that color. Now, the value of this will have the color custom property and fall back to white, which is, once again, my primary button's color, background color. Now, my background and border are going to read that private variable. This is the full code. Now, actually, nothing changed. I over-engineered this for, at this moment, no complete reason. But we're getting somewhere with this. Because what happens now that color aquamarine, for example, gets into that first variable color, so now the private variable is defined and everything just flows through. Before moving on, though, let's maybe take a look at our outline buttons. Didn't have those. Just do this. We already created the border. We just set the background transparent and the color to be read, that private variable. Now fully creating my 4 buttons already. This is the full code of styling 4 buttons in CSS. Now, I do have to address the elephant in the room here, because I'm aware that there are a lot more modern approaches to the system these days. Look, to be honest, I don't have anything against this. If it makes you happy, please do. I don't care how you make your money as a developer. I don't know what you buy with your money as a developer. But, I mean, do what you want. But I do really want to tell you one little thing. And I know that these utility-first classes get used for more reasons than just for those buttons. But if you would take these buttons and kind of put them into a perspective with a utility-first CSS library that I'm not going to name, this would be your output in that case. Wait, there's more. And this. I couldn't fit it in 2 slides. It's 3. Oh, sorry. I had a little bit left. So, I mean, I do think this is kind of important because I believe every byte counts. Every byte becomes a kilobyte, becomes a megabyte, becomes a gigabyte. And it's a very important thing. Don't forget your CSS is rendered inside of your head. This is probably not a book on performance you have to read. So please keep these things in mind while you're developing. Everything matters. But this is my happy place. This is what makes me happy. A little bit of a beautiful engineered code. This is what I had. It's perfect, it's smart, it's small. Is it small enough? Can we actually make this a bit smaller? I guess we can. By introducing a second custom property. Now I want you to focus at the bottom right there when the button is hovered and focused. Now this is a general focus state that I'm introducing here, and in that case color will be the hover color or fall back to aquamarine, which is my primary button's hover and focus state. The only thing left for me to do is inside of button secondary I have to add a color and a hover color, and this way I can create new colors altogether. This is, with CSS nesting enabled, the full code. It's 22 lines to write 4 buttons. That's it. It's all you have to do. What if I want to add a new button inside of my design system? Well, for example, an orange button. I have the class orange, I have the class orange outline. The only thing I do is add that orange, add the color custom property, and the hover color. 4 lines of CSS. 2 extra buttons in my design system. Now that's a smart system. It's easy to manage. It's easy to expand. And if you do run into specificity issues, you can use modern techniques such as layer and scope, which I am not going to go into now, but there's a lot of opportunities here. Over-engineering actually works. Speaking of engineering, those are just buttons, right? Let's go a bit further and talk about engineering grids. So while I take a little sip, let me just show you what we're going to make. It's going to be the most epic demo you've ever seen. So we have a grid, 3 columns, 5 items. Very beautiful. Now we could take the modern approach to this, which we are not going to do. It's kind of having a lot of responsive stuff going on there as well, right? But I'm going to write a bit of CSS for this. So I have a div with the class grid and some children inside of it, and then I'm going to use that selector and set something to display grid. I will use grid template columns and repeat it 3 times 1 fragment, meaning 3 times equally sized fragments. This is how I do that basic setup. Already recreating this. Now, some of you might thought, yeah, but your first modern approach example you showed, that was responsive. This isn't, and you're right. But, I mean, it was responsive. It had like these nice little names such as SM and LG and that desktop and large, oh, I hate those naming. This is 2025, people. We are still copying pretty pictures of a website. Stop doing it. The web is fluid. There's hundreds and thousands of devices out there. Don't just think in small, medium, and tablet. Those days are gone. Think beyond that. So what we are going to do is we're going to automate that responsive with a single line of CSS. So the gap of my grid is 3v max, kind of should have said that as well. That's 3% of the largest side of the viewport. And then grid template columns I'm going to change now to repeat auto-fit, meaning it will fit the space. It will have a minimum of 450 pixels for a column and a maximum of 1 fragment, meaning from the moment 2 columns of 450 pixels can be next to each other, including thought about the gap, they will. So with this, I will already have created a responsive grid. Do note though when I'm going smaller than 450 pixels, because then I'm starting to get a bit of overflow, so absolutely worthless. Or is it? If I would introduce a second function inside of my min-max function, a min function setting the minimum to a 450 pixels, all fall back to 100%, then the browser will take this into account. If 450 pixels won't fit anymore, it's going to fall back 100%. With this one-liner of CSS that you see right here, you are able to create your fully responsive adaptive grid from mobile to desktop, if you like those terms. Pretty neat. But I do understand that if you're going to show this kind of grid to a junior developer that just started in your firm, he might probably go back to his teacher and say, I have learned something very wrong from you the last couple of years. So this is why I believe there is something I'd like to call engineering for understanding. And I'm kind of contradicting myself with the bytes here, but I do think in those cases it might be smart to add some custom properties on top that can be used as sort of a lever where you could set those variables inside of that complicated function, makes it a bit more easier for a person to change the things. But I'm already doing this. Maybe I can take this a step further. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to add a cascade layer around this. It's not really important. If you don't know what cascade layers are yet, no problem. It's all fine. What's more important is the system that I'm going to create. Above my layout layer, I will create a new layer, which will be my theme layer. Now in this theme layer, I'm going to set my defaults, because every design system kind of has a default, right? So this will be those 450 pixels and those 3v max for the gap. Those are going to be my design system defaults. Now by reusing that idea that I had from those buttons and introducing a private variable, I could read that column minimum in there and fall back to the default column minimum. So by default, if I give something the class grid, it's going to be 450 pixels and a gap of 3v max. But I have 2 custom properties in here, new ones. I have column min and gap, which will take precedence. These are something that I can use from now on. If I wanted to create another grid, I just add grid in there, and a second class, for example, product grid. And the only thing I'd have to do is set that column minimum specifically for that product grid, set the gap for that product grid, and because my system is already perfect in place, I will have created a completely new scenario. This is where things get interesting. But what if your default change? What if your designer chooses that on a smaller screen or on a bigger screen, the gap should change everywhere? You only have to change it once. Just change it in the place where we set those root variables, write a media query in there, and it will just get flown through everything in your grid. Stop repeating yourself, stop overcomplicating. It's not needed anymore. You can do something simple and elegant, such as this. But do not stop there. We can even take this one more step further. What if I would introduce a second class? For example, a flex class. Now what is this going to do? It's going to do actually pretty much the same thing as I did with my grid. It's going to set a private variable, flex minimum, that's going to read a column minimum that's not defined yet, and it's going to fall back to that default column minimum. Now I'm going to target my direct children, as you see with the asterisks right there, setting the flex to grow, shrink at 1, and read out that flex min by default 450 pixels. I had 5 items in a 3-column grid. It wasn't that pretty. So what if I would in that case change grid to flex? using those same variables and same defaults, I would have changed that grid into something like this, where the items stretch over each other. You can go beyond this. You can go beyond this with named columns. Now, it's not a complete Talcon grid here, but this is a real powerhouse right there. And I kind of would urge to go to, oh, sorry, bright slide, layout break, should have warned you for that. They don't have a dark mode. Layout breakouts builder, and you can really create some stuff in there, some grids by default, but I do want you to check out the CSS that's in there, because it is going to really help you understand everything a lot better. Do play around with this. For people taking photos, and don't worry, I have a bunch of notes in the end. You get all that stuff. But work smarter, everybody. You got this. It's about less code input. It's about something that you create that's easily maintainable and upgradable. And please, let us just stop copying pretty pictures of websites. Think fluid. There's so much going on there. But I do have to be honest, there's always a bit of danger around the corner when creating these kinds of systems. Because there's always that one guy that thinks that hex code 333 is the perfect value for a column minimum variable, and probably leaves that change in 70 change files in your pull request, if only there's a way that we could debug this. And this is possible now with add property. So what is add property? Add property is part of the CSS Houdini of APIs. It allows us to specifically define our CSS custom property. Look at them as sort of our initial variables. They can do some time checking. They can do constraining. You can give a default value. And as I've shown you in the last couple of examples, these custom properties, they all inherit, but with this, you can turn it off, which can be handy as well. This has about 93% browser support now, so you might be thinking like, a little bit too early, maybe, but it's getting very close out there, so pretty usable very soon. And this is the syntax. So you have add property, and you define your variable. The syntax, you can define, for example, color in there. You can choose whether it inherits or not, and you can set the initial value, which I've set to coffee. If you're wondering, it's not a brown color, it's a bluish kind of shade. Missed opportunity there, I guess. These are all the syntax options available. I think I've used pretty much all of them already, except for maybe a few. You can create a lot of fun stuff with them. We'll get to show those in a second. But let's start with a very basic demo, just to get our heads around it. And of course, let's use color, because that's nice and visual, right? So I set add property to have a custom property color, mine to 2 dashes. You also have to add 2 dashes there. And the syntax is going to be color, no surprise there. I'm going to let this custom property inherit, and it's going to have the initial value of deep pink. Now my div is going to set the background to color, and then I have 3 of those divs, each with a different class name. The first div is going to have a hex color, the second one an RGB color, and the last one an OKLCH color, which is very modern and pretty. CSS knows this. A color is a color. It's just going to know if it's an RGB function. It's going to type save. But the more interesting part that I'd like to show you is that now inside of my DevTools, I can see the following inside my custom property when I hover over it. I see the value, and I see that this should be of the syntax color. It should inherit, and the initial value is deep pink. I also have a link to jump to that original declaration. So what if that one guy comes along and thinks that the number 1 is a perfectly valid value for a color custom property? Well, this would happen. Remember that I set my initial color to deep pink? It's going to fall back to deep pink for that first color. But what's maybe even more interesting is that inside my DevTools, I can now see a little warning sign telling me this is an invalid property value, and the expected type here is color. Let's dive a bit deeper. How about listing options? Any TypeScript people in here? Can see some hands? Oh, yo, TypeScript's big. Yeah, so you know the syntax, right? And you can do this with CSS as well. So here you're defining that a color should be aquamarine or cyan or blue. You will have to set the initial value to one of those though, or otherwise it will not succeed setting the custom property. And this would happen in my previous example. Everything would have been turned blue because I didn't define one of those. But I can see that inside of my DevTools here, once again, telling me that the expected type should be aquamarine, cyan, or blue. This is also possible for mixed values. Maybe you want to give somebody the opportunity to set 1 or 1 second. Maybe that's something you want to do. Maybe more common would be something like this, where you set the length or auto. Think about your margins, margin 30 pixels or margin auto. This is something where you would use this case. How about multiple values? By using a hashtag next to an image, for example, you can type on comma-separated values. For example, multiple background image. You can just do this with CSS. Now, comma-separated values do happen in CSS. What's more common is space-separated values. And you could do that with a plus symbol, for example, length plus. Perfect for all your paddings, margins, border radius, shorthands. You can use something like this. There's one limitation though, and that is that the initial value should be supported by your browser. You can use add supports as feature query in CSS if you're not sure, so something you can do there. But here is the interesting part. There's one little difference to you TypeScript people. We ship the types. CSS actually ships these types to the browser, so we can teach the browser a few things. So I wanted to create a little animation. The circle you're seeing right there is a clip path. So only the part inside of that circle is visible. Imagine it like this. That's the animation I wanted to create, with a circle moving to the right side, going to the bottom, to the left, and then finally enlarge to reveal that whole image. I want to do that on scroll because I just love scroll-driven animations and because I can. And this was my initial setup for this. So this was the first ID. I set move X, move Y, and scale to 20%. I set my body to a height of 400 VH because I wanted a scroll bar and I'm lazy. And then I positioned my image, but then this is where I'm reading those custom properties. Inside of that clip path, which is a circle, the first value being the scale of that circle, and then the X and Y position. It has an animation rotate orb, and it's going to go on the scroll animation timeline right there. This is the animation itself. So you kind of see it happening, right? It goes from move X and Y from 0, 0 to 100, 0, which is the right-hand side, to the bottom right, 100, 100, to the left, and scaling up slowly. I'm going to give you a few seconds to think what happens if I did this. Did it animate? Did my browser break? Who knows? That would be exciting, wouldn't it? If browsers just broke like that. Maybe just nothing happens. Nothing. Absolutely nothing. But something did happen, though. When scrolling the page, it kind of jumped between keyframe and keyframe. Now remember what I said at the start of this presentation. Custom properties can contain anything you want. This is also true for the browser. When you're going between those keyframes, the browser hasn't got an idea that you're going from percentage to percentage. All he cares you would be going from percentage to a string. It has no idea. But now we can teach it. If I would have changed those original declarations and changed them with the add property syntax, I could tell the browser, hey, this is a percentage. Be sure that this is a percentage. I do this for move X, move Y, and scale. At scale, I'm setting the initial value to 20. And then the browser would completely animate this based on custom properties. pretty handy stuff. This is another example of that, where I'm using the screen's not really doing it justice a lot, but it's kind of changing it and creating some Polaroid kind of effect right here. Not sure if you can see it well, but yeah, that's kind of an alternative approach to that, and this is also using the same technique. But this opens so many windows of opportunities. Like, for example, a hue rotation, very popular thing in JavaScript framework websites. Seen it all the time. It's kind of less now, but it was very popular. So it's an angle. You define an angle right here, and then you have little spin animation going from an angle of 0 degrees to a 360 degrees, like constantly turning. What you would do then, inside of a background, you have an HSL color scheme standing for hue, saturation, and lightness. Now, hue is a wheel. It's a color wheel. So if you're just rotating from 0 to 360 degrees the whole time, you would be going through loops in colors, and you can play around with that saturation and lightness, creating something like this. But it's more than that. I have one animation to rotate things from 0 to 360, so I could use this for a hue color, an HSL color. I could use this for another HSL color and change the lightness and darkness, and maybe I can even rotate the gradient at the same time using one simple animation. This is one animation, except for the lines that are being created that you're seeing right here, the turning, the changing color, just that one animation. And this is something else I created a little while ago. I tend to create a CSS Christmas card. I'm that nerdy. And there I had the idea of a transform function space separated or none at the bottom right there. Let me just show you the demo, but it actually uses pretty much the same technique where you're using like something like this with a scroll-driven animation, using some anchor positioning, and at the same time updating those custom properties the whole time, changing a bit of hue color while I'm at it as well. So there is so much strength, so much power in using that property. Oh. One more thing, though. Custom properties can have an initial value with a calc function. Now, I haven't used that one, to be honest, but wanted to give you all the info, so there you go. So what about functions? I've talked about a lot of stuff, but not really about functions. Let's first start with fluid typography. A lot of people still think that the clamp function, which is used a lot for fluid typography, doesn't have support. It has 96% support. You can use this today. I'm telling you, if there's a person coming saying that his browser does not support it, yeah, that would be weird in most cases. But what does clamp do? It takes a minimum value, it takes a preferred value, and it takes a maximum value. And this is why they use this for fluid typography, because they have a minimum size, a maximum size, and in the center they calculate a slope based on container width or viewport width. And then you can create fluid typography. Now, I know the slope might be a hard thing to calculate. There's tools for that. So you can use something such as utopia.fyi, where you can create this kind of slope and this kind of idea. So that makes things a bit more easy for you. But this is the idea. If you use clamp on a bit of text, you kind of get fluid typography while you're changing that window. But I want you to focus at the bottom here for a second inside of my DevTools. So while resizing, for line height it's normal, but you see that my font size is actually get a comma value. And somebody pointed this out to me, telling me, hey, dude, subpixels are bad. You shouldn't do that. So I thought maybe I can find a solution. How about using a round function? Now, the round function only has about 90%. But if I would add that round function around my title size, rounding my clamping, and set an interval to 1 pixel, meaning that it will have a computed value always to the nearest pixel point. Then I will, once again, have fluid typography. It looks a little bit more jumpy, but not everybody resizes the screen the whole time as we do. But you see that we have a nice fixed pixel value now at the bottom. Modern CSS to the win, right? Let's take it one more thing here and talk about color functions. So I saw this by Matthias Ott for the first time. Thought it was pure wizardry, but it's a very nice idea. So at the top you have a primary color set in an OKLCH base. What happens then? You have 10 variables out there from primary 10 to primary 100. And this is going to use an OKLCH color function. And it's going to set from that primary color, take 10% lightness and keep the chroma, that's what the middle point is, the C, and the hue the same value. So he's just changing the lightness of that one primary color, meaning he can create a color palette based on one value. But Matthias didn't stop there. Matthias went a bit beyond that. Because Matthias thought, this looks a bit pale. I want a palette that's like this, where there's like big darks and kind of getting a bit more vibrant and kind of pale at the end, like some sign of a wave, right? Wait, a wave. We have that in CSS, don't we? How about trigonometric functions? Something we have in CSS. So, what's the idea here? Very shortly, this is what Matthias did. The chroma is the vibrance of the color, and in that way he calculated, based on a base value, which you can play around with a bit, and with this calculation with a sine wave, to kind of create an easing inside of that color palette in the chroma. It's a fantastic idea, and actually this week I've talked to Matthias, and I've released the following. Ocal chroma, that's how I pronounce it, and it gives you the opportunity to just have one base input and you can play around with it, change your colors. You can even, if you want to change your default color space you work in. This is OKLCH, you can go to sRGB and you can create this. You get the variables for free, you can pay up to 10 patterns and you can even share it with your friends because there's a share link inside of it. So do check it out. It's a little baby that I just sent off to the world. It's a lot of fun. But remember, we are only getting started. The CSS working group has resolved to adopt a few things. How about CSS functions? Actual CSS functions are coming to us. They are already available in Chrome Canary, so the wait might be shorter than you think. This is an example where you have a negative function to just get the negative back all the time. How about CSS mixins? Also on the roadmap, it's also something that will come to CSS, highly reducing the need for preprocessors. And last but not least, how about CSS conditionals? Actual if and else statements inside of your CSS. They are coming. Now, CSS engineering, I mean, it's not a gimmick, right? I do hope that I've shown you today that if you really put your mind to it, you can create some systems inside of this. Systems that are actually smart. Systems in which you can build, systems where you can expand. Systems that help in your performance. Because every byte counts, and every byte turns to a kilobyte, to a megabyte, and to a gigabyte. It keeps piling up. CSS engineering is for you. And I do realize that some people will get away with this very easily, and some people will have it a bit harder. But I can promise you one thing, that is, if you put your mind to it, just try to create a little system, one little custom property at a time. Then maybe one day you will look at your code and be baffled by the thing you just created. Something inside of you will click. And that exact moment might actually be the moment that you're realizing that CSS engineering is actually programming. Thank you.